Welcome to the Silent Wire podcast, and back to one of my TV and film episodes where I look at how loss and grief are handled through fictional characters, storytelling, script writing, directing and screenplays. I'm Claire Sands, host of the Silent Wire podcast, which is exploring 101 different types of loss, and a very keen, albeit yet to show many others, storyteller and fiction writer. One of my great admirations in life is writing that inspires and evokes emotion. And I don't mean the literary kind that wins awards and no one fully understands but won't admit to. I mean books and scripts and stories that relay moments that we can empathise with, that make you laugh, cry, fume or sigh. Which is why, high on my bucket list, is sneaking into a writer's room for a show or a film I love and watching the magic happen. Dream big, as they say. And being allowed to sit quietly in a room of people chatting, well, I don't think I'm exactly reaching for the moon on this one, and it feels slightly more doable than the next one on my list, Ride a Lion. My last TV episode analysis was on the BBC sitcom Ghosts, where I got super excited because one of the cast and writers listened to it and commented on Twitter. This was wonderful. Thank you. And the U's in capital letters. A great moment. I'm just waiting for my career to take off any day now. If you want to check out that episode, search your podcast player or our podcast list on the website for Grief in Ghosts, a BBC sitcom observed. This time I'm picking up 2 consecutive episodes from a comedy drama that we discovered and immediately adored. It came out in 2020 and it's called Ted Lasso. Now this is not an easy thing to just go out and watch for everyone because it's on Apple TV, although I think it's called Apple TV Plus now. But I'm not sure if you're supposed to say the edition sign on the end of it. Apple TV edition? Who knows? But if you can find yourself a free trial, it's well worth binging it like we did. Now, I'm not alone in appreciation for this programme, as its 8.8 rating on IMDb will testify, but I might be in the minority for appreciating how they handled loss. Apple TV describes it like this. Ted Lasso is a football coach leading a British soccer team. What he lacks in knowledge, he makes up for with optimism and biscuits. In a nutshell, Ted Lasso is probably the closest man you're going to find to a Care Bear or Winnie the Pooh. He's just a glass half full, genuinely kind to his core man whose mouth just constantly spills words of encouragement, insight and humour. Especially a deep love and reverence for a great pun. I suspect he's made the life of Jason Sudeikis, the actor who plays Ted, a little more complicated, because how could you meet Jason without hoping you're going to meet Ted? Anyway, he comes to London from America where he's been coaching American college football, to manage a football, or soccer as he calls it, team in England, not knowing anything about the game. He brings with him Coach Beard, who helps fill in the gaps. It's a comedy drama with great scripts, great music and characters that make you want to dump all your own friends and join the cast instead. And as it's focused around sport, an area of life literally defined by wins and losses, loss, or avoiding it, is at the heart already. But alongside that are characters and relationships facing their own personal loves and losses, and that's what makes it pretty special. I'll put a link to the trailer in the show notes for if you want to get a feel for this before we go any further. Last time I analysed a TV episode, I went through it scene by scene, but as I'm doing 2 episodes this time, I'm not going to do it to that level of detail. However, I do need to describe the scenes to give those of you new to it a feel of what's happening. Another thing you also need to know is that I'm not a football fan, not by any means. Briefly was in my teens, scribbling Crystal Palace Eagles on my exercise books, that's my dad's team, and queuing around the block all night for playoff tickets to watch Ipswich at Wembley, who my boyfriend supported at the time. And when I was in hospital once, I got a signed photo from Ian Wright, which I ruined by going over the signature with a biro because his pen had stopped working partway through his name. But on the whole, it's not for me. Noisy sport that generally ruins decent conversations in my view. The reason I'm telling you this is because it speaks into how good this programme must be for me to like it when it's based around a sport I don't watch. Well, it's based around amazing characters, friendships and relationships, but they all happen in a football club. AFC Richmond, a fictional football club based in London. Ironically, filmed partly at Selhurst Park, where our family football team, Crystal Palace, play. So this is about as far as I can go before I have to give a spoiler alert. From this point on, this episode will be littered with spoilers for these episodes and the programme as a whole. So if you ever intend on watching this programme or episodes and you'd rather not know what happens, go away, watch it all and then return. This would be me. It's well worth it. But if you've already seen it or you're not fussed or you're never going to watch it, then come with me because I will definitely make this accessible to anyone listening. You don't have to have seen the programme to appreciate this script writing and directing. For those who heard the last TV episode I did on ghosts, you'll have noticed a bit of piano playing. Well, that was the theme tune for the show, and to get us into it again, I've coaxed my reluctantly musical husband into hearing the theme tune and playing it for me by ear on the piano again. And if I announce this will always be how I'm going to start these episodes, he's going to have to help me next time as well. And I still occasionally listen to his rendition of the Ghost tune he did, just to make me smile, because I used the ones with the mistakes in it, which as a perfectionist just kills him a little bit inside. So come with me as I walk you through what I love about how the writers, producers and directors handled loss in Ted Lasso Series 1, or as I like to refer to it, Loss in Lasso. So a quick rundown of the main characters for you newbies. Ted Lasso, our coach over from America. He has a unique way with words and a thick accent that I think is southern. His approach to life is described online as folksy optimism. He is kindness personified and has a very accurate insight into how to connect with people. We learn as the episodes unfold that he's left a wife and son in America because of marital issues, which end in a divorce during the programme and a lot of video chats with his young son. His character is beautifully put together, containing bundles of belief in the good in people and life, and he illustrates that with a sign taped above his office in the locker room that just says, "Believe." But he also has his own problems to navigate, including panic attacks after his divorce, which make him even more lovable somehow, and more importantly, relatable. Plus, he makes amazing biscuits and hates tea. Coach Beard, Lasso's longtime assistant and friend who comes with him from America. Coach Beard is weird and wonderful, and just gets Ted in a way that only a true friend can, and their tight bond is evident from the very first scene we see them in. Rebecca Welton, the new owner of AFC Richmond, after her husband who had it before her cheated on her multiple times and it all went through the press. She initially hires Lasso to sabotage the team and get back at her husband, but he quickly wins her over and does better than she expects. She has a killer wardrobe, a great singing voice, and is the female that I want beside me in my career. Leslie Higgins, he's the director of football operations, assistant to Rebecca, family man with a wife and 5 children. Named after his mother, he says, "I'm what's known as a feminine junior." Very fun, great facial expressions, bonds with Ted very quickly, and just an all-round top bloke, as we say over here. Jamie Tart, a very skilled and successful young striker on the team with a massive ego and huge amounts of misplaced confidence. The journey this character goes on through the 2 series is beautifully handled, and you won't help but go from loathe to love. He also comes with a rather irritating earworm that the crowd chant. Jamie Tart do 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 do, Jamie Tart do 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 do, Jamie Tart do 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 do, Jamie Tart. You're welcome. Roy Kent, often known by his full name, Roy Kent. Roy Kent's the veteran midfielder and captain when we first meet him, very angry, very hot-headed, very foul-mouthed, very direct, and very likeable. This character has a depth, and his straightforward, no-nonsense manner endeared him to us straight away, as well as his deep voice and unrivalled black eyebrows. Comes with another earworm from his fans. He's here, he's there, he's every f***ing-where, Roy Kent, Roy Kent. Again, you're welcome. Nathan Shelley, the football team kit man when we meet him. His journey moves from ignored and overlooked to overly entitled, and it's a kind of a cautionary tale of rags to riches through a career. Keely Jones, a model who dates Jamie Tart at the beginning and is dating Roy Kent for most of the rest of the programme. She becomes the club's manager of marketing and public relations, an incredibly lovable, hard-working, driven girl who, with all her gold hoop, animal print, high ponytail style fashion choices, is a wise old owl at heart and the perfect other half for Roy Kent. Then there's also a sports psychologist in Season 2 and the rest of the football team, which all add the final touches to bring together this engaging, talented cast. Now, there were a few episodes I could have chosen to look at about how loss and grief are handled. For example, an obvious one might have been Season 2, Episode 10, No Weddings and a Funeral. This was the funeral of Rebecca's father, in which most of the cast have a reaction to being faced with this death. And there were some great scenes, but for me it didn't quite hit the mark as much as their handling of some of the other losses they've dealt with. Somehow the beautifully handled scenes of Ted and the sports psychologist around his panic attacks in this episode were just a bit too far removed from some of the girly loudness on the other side of the cast, and the 2 areas didn't quite marry for me in the way that I'd kind of hoped to create the emotions I was expecting. It was a bit more of a discord than a harmony, which some people prefer of course, but I wasn't really feeling it in the same way as the other episodes I've chosen. Season 2, Episode 9, Beard After Hours, is a weird diversion from the plot, but has its moments on dealing with loss and offers an insight into Coach Beard's weird and wonderful inner world. I suspect it means more to you if you've seen what it pays homage to, Martin Scorsese's 1985 cult classic After Hours, which I haven't. So the 2 episodes I've decided to focus on are from Series 1, consecutive episodes starting with Episode 9, All Apologies. The overview of this episode is that Ted Lasso has initially refused to put Roy Kent, the granddad of the team as Jamie Tartt calls him, on the bench, despite the fact he's slowing down and the other coaches think it's time that he's benched. And Rebecca, owner of the club, finally owns up and tells Lasso how she's been trying to sabotage him since he arrived, despite the fact that he thinks they're great friends. I mean, they're literally on the same team, so it was a safe assumption. So there's conflict amongst the leadership of the team because Lasso doesn't believe results are the main thing that should drive decisions, and Coach Beard is trying to show him that to the players, results are everything. The episode starts with a scene after a bad match for Roy Kent. Kent's in a wheelie bin full of water and floating ice cubes, watching the commentary of the match, which includes a slide that says, "There once was an old man named Kent," regularly submerging himself with a low growl of annoyance. Ted opens the door, flicks on the light, and comes in to sit next to the bin, asking if someone ordered a Roy on the rocks. Roy expects to be read the riot act for losing them the game, but Ted points out he doesn't need to do that because Roy is beating himself up enough as it is, and he should just go easy on himself. Ted leaves with a passing comment that he's got his back, and then says, "Look at you in there, looking like a brunette Oscar the Grouch." A comment I particularly chuckled at, but it helps to see the visual. And I took great delight this week when Brett Goldstein, the actor that plays Roy, posted a video of himself on Sesame Street where he's in a scene with the original Oscar the Grouch. Brilliant. Anyway, this is the backdrop for the main tussle here. Roy is heading towards retirement from a career that's been his life. Ted refuses to bench him in a classic Ted approach. People matter. My interest was already piqued with this. How are they going to handle the loss of a career, especially when the person we're talking about is prone to outbursts of extreme anger and expletives, and seemingly has built his whole life around the sport? Alongside it, we have Keely and Rebecca in conflict because Keely knows Rebecca was trying to sabotage Ted, and she's trying to tell Rebecca that she needs to come clean to Ted, and there's a lovely line where Rebecca says, "What would be the point of telling Ted now? It doesn't change anything." And Keely comes back with the response, "It would change how I feel about you." And right there we have another loss on the cards, friendship. And Rebecca realises it, and we see her starting to fully understand all the bad stuff she's done to some very good, well-meaning people around her. We also have the Richmond team facing loss in their matches, and Ted having to answer about this to the press, where he defends and supports them. And Higgins, Rebecca's lovely loyal assistant, has finally quit because of her determination to ruin the club and not wanting to be part of it. So we've got a huge loss there as well because everyone loves Higgins, and again this adds to Rebecca's list of people that she's hurt. Coach Beard and Nathan eventually sit Ted down and tell him that Roy has to come out of the starting lineup. But Ted refuses to bench him, saying he wants them to know, though, he values their opinions, even though they're wrong. And Rebecca attempts to tell Ted what she's done but finds she can't do it, generally fearful of losing face and lacking in the confidence to tidy up her mess. And after a failed attempt to tell him, talking about dictionaries instead, we see her after he's left trying to get it together in her office. And then suddenly her ex-husband waltzes in and announces he's about to have a baby with his new, much younger girlfriend, despite having told Rebecca when they were together he never wanted kids. And in the final straw of pain for Rebecca and a very hurtful exchange, he infers it wasn't that he didn't want kids so much as he didn't want them with her. This is where you really get to experience the depth of these characters, because just moments before, we were wanting Rebecca to be exposed for what she's done to Ted. And then we watch the pain of what she's facing with her horrible ex and her divorce, and we find ourselves just rooting for her to do the right thing because we know it's how she's going to start to heal, and because she needs these guys around her for support as well. As her husband leaves and she stands in her office with tears in her eyes, background music starts up and we watch her slowly walk, kind of float really, from her office downstairs through the locker room, full of naked players getting changed, which she doesn't notice, and straight into Ted's office, where she slowly confesses everything, calling herself some very strong words more worthy of Roy Kent. She's honest about the loss of her husband and what it's driven her to do, realising she's hurt good people and done despicable things. She also confesses to approving the transfer of Jamie Tartt to another team behind Ted's back, another loss they're all facing. And there's a beat where we are waiting to see what Ted will do in response, and you can see the hurt and surprise on his face. But in classic Ted style, he doesn't disappoint, and he forgives her, telling her he knows how hard divorce is, and that it drives people to do crazy things. It's a beautiful example of empathy, friendship, and a boss-coach relation that we all wish actually existed, and especially when they hug it out next, something we were all missing during COVID. Then Ted says into her shoulder, "You know, I think that if you care about someone, and you've got a little love in your heart, there ain't nothing you can't get through together." At the same time, the coaches aren't talking to Ted because of his decisions about Roy, which is why I love the dynamics of these episodes. It's never all great, it's never all bad. It's a perfect dance of the two. Conflict and resolution, condemnation and redemption. Halfway through the episode, we find Rebecca, buoyed by her honesty with Ted, going to Higgins' house to try and make amends with her assistant. She finds him at home, playing a double bass with a tiny beard that he's grown. It's a great scene as Higgins waits to hear what Rebecca has to say. Rebecca comments on the small beard, and Higgins says it makes him look how he feels. Chill. When Rebecca asks what Mrs. Higgins thinks of it, he says with a very straight face, "She hates it with a white-hot intensity." And then they laugh. And as the tension breaks, we know that he's thrown her a bone and an in. And Rebecca takes it. She comes clean and apologises for treating him so badly and making him an accomplice in her schemes. She's honest about losing her way for a bit, and he graciously accepts all that she says and compliments her on how this new approach suits her. Alongside this, we have Roy Kent and Ted in a conversation sat in an empty football stand. Ted is attempting to talk to Roy about the starting lineup for the next match, and we wonder if he's going to bench him. But before they chat about that, Roy loses it, assuming he's being benched, and he's hurt because Ted said he had his back. So before we hear anything from Ted on it, Roy storms off in a haze of F-words. Later, over a pint, Coach Beard flips out when Ted says he wants to start Roy at the match. Beard tells Ted it's okay to care about results, because relegation is a huge deal, and he doesn't agree with picking a player's feelings over a coach's duty just to make a point. He also says he doesn't want to drink with someone that selfish, and he leaves. And just as some relationships mend, others are torn further apart. Then we see Keely's immense wisdom coming out in a cracking scene with her and Roy Kent and Roy's niece Phoebe. Keely knows the end of Roy's career is coming, and when he starts to broach the subject while looking out the window, she jumps at the opportunity for this conversation, getting them comfy on the sofa with fluffy cushions. Then Roy, in his manly, gruff voice, under thick-set eyebrows that we all love, says, "Roy Kent's been the best player on..." I'm not going to do that. "Roy Kent's been the best player on every team he's been on since he was a kid. I like being Roy Kent. I don't know if I can handle being some loser has-been called Roy." He goes on to say, "It's not just a game to me. It's all I've ever known. It's who I am. It's all I am." Keely doesn't say anything, but just calls over 6-year-old Phoebe and says, "I need you to close your eyes for me, yeah? Okay, can you describe your Uncle Roy? Everything you can think of. Go." Phoebe says, "Well, he's my uncle. His beard is scratchy. He buys me ice cream. He swears a lot. He's really funny. And I love him." Keely turns to Roy. "See, I didn't hear anything about being a footballer." And he says, "Who gives a shit about what she has to say? She's 6. Keely points out it doesn't matter what others think anyway. What matters is what Roy thinks about Roy. It's a poignant scene handled with wisdom as they navigate a huge imminent loss. And not a loss everyone would understand. As Keely says at the beginning, he plays a game for a living. And we've experienced this on the podcast. All losses need grieving. But sometimes we don't feel we have the permission to grieve because it's not a bereavement. Or we don't realise we're allowed to grieve the end of jobs, careers, dreams or health, etc. In this scene, Keely shows Roy that yes, it hurts, but there's more to him than what he's losing. And it's the start of his decision to begin to accept what's coming towards him that he can't control. And I love that in this scene she shows him, she doesn't tell him. And that's great writing. Eventually, we come to a conversation between Roy Kent and Ted in Ted's kitchen. Full of fun banter and discussion that involves peanut butter, tea, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Mrs. Shipley upstairs, but also the resignation that Roy's career is coming to an end, and they consider announcing that Roy Kent is injured if he doesn't start the match, which Roy agrees might help him if he's to move clubs in the future rather than being benched. But ultimately, it's a big decision that Roy asks if he can go away and think about, and Ted tells him that he would think he was a big dummy poo-poo face if he didn't. Then we're back in the changing rooms at the football ground and the players are all getting ready for a training session. But Roy is noticeably absent as they're getting changed, and Ted glances towards Roy's cubbyhole area with his name on it, and we all wonder, with him, is he going to turn up? He does arrive, however, apologising for coming in late and some other stuff about his niece as he gets changed, and then he asks if he can say something to everybody, and we all hold our breath and wait to see what's coming. big retirement speech, apology for being slow. As he stands, he puts a blue bib over his football shirt and yells, "Second team's going to kick first team's f***ing asses today," and everyone smiles and cheers. Now, if you're not into football, you might be going, what does that mean? Basically, my take on it is that usually before a big match, when training, the first team would be made up of those that are on the starting lineup of the team. So by Roy putting on the bib to suggest he's in the second team, and by announcing they're going to win, we get two messages. Firstly, he's making space for someone else on the first team by stepping back into the second team, maybe the beginning of the end. And secondly, he's still as passionate as ever about playing to win and motivating his team. This ends the episode, and if you watch through the credits, he's also the last one to leave the locker room, touching the Believe sign above Ted's door on the way out. Symbolic, because usually for a match, the captain would be the one that leads the players out onto the pitch first. But he heads out to training last. And so you see why I needed to do 2 episodes, because we move into the next episode, Series 1, Episode 10, which is called The Hope That Kills You. The opening scenes of this episode are Nathan finding out he's lost his job as kit boy and has been promoted to assistant coach, which is a happy moment with a dark undertone for me. What some might see as him just getting the wrong end of the stick and being angry at first with his superiors because he thinks he's been sacked instead. It's more than that. For people writing this cleverly and building characters this fully, it was one of the first glimpses of a dark side to Nathan, a chip on his shoulder, an assumption of those around him, a defensiveness that plays out later in the series in a way that is really hard to watch. I'm not focusing on Nathan's reactions to loss because they don't come into these episodes as much, but he handles things in a very different way, the exact opposite of Ted in fact, and it adds another dimension of variety of responses that we can all choose to personal loss and attack. The next scene is Roy Kent telling Ted he has to pick a new captain for the team now, and Ted telling Roy he won't, and they pass the captain's armband back and forth between them. Ted insists Roy chooses the new one, and until he does, there is no captain. This concludes with Roy having the captain's band lightly thrown onto his head before he leaves with the comment to Ted, "This is why it's hard to love you," which Coach Beard and Ted are ecstatic about because it implies they've finally won him over. So this episode covers the preparations for a big game against Manchester City that will decide if Richmond get relegated or not. And Man City is the team that Jamie Tartt plays for now, so they're going up against someone that was on their side not long back. Jamie is less than polite about them in an interview beforehand, which results in one of the players, Isaac, throwing something at the TV so it smashes. Plus, it's likely if they lose and go down, Ted could probably get fired. Football is brutal, and loss costs jobs. Then, as Ted and Coach Beard are in the local pub getting mocked by fans for their season's performance, the landlady uses a phrase for the first time that features as the title of this episode. Ted says to the fans, "You act like we've lost the game already. Why don't you have a little hope?" "Ah, Ted," the landlady replies, "ain't you lived here long enough to realise? It's the hope that kills you." Ted is not impressed with this saying and gathers the coaches together to discuss tactics, telling Nathan he hates ties, it needs to be a win. He's not relying on Crystal Palace and their result to dictate what happens to Richmond. Richmond might be a made-up team, by the way, but the others aren't, like Man City and Crystal Palace. Then Nathan comes out with the killer words, "It's hopeless." Ted freaks out and then reminds him of the yellow paper with blue writing on it that he has at home and in the locker room that reads "Believe" on it, and he gets very angry and a bit disillusioned. It's the hope that kills you. Now this is a phrase I've heard of, but I didn't realise it's quite a famous one in the football world. As you can imagine, when you host a podcast about finding hope in loss, I'm with Ted. I'm not a fan of the premise, but I do understand it, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't experienced it, especially when you go through infertility and childlessness like we have. There comes a point when it feels dangerous to hope, to dream, to set your expectations high, because you know the feeling of them getting dashed, and that's basically what it means. That sometimes it's better not to hope you might win, because then your dreams don't get smashed when you don't. And there's a whole blog post I could do on just that statement, but for now, you just need to know this is what hangs over this episode. Is it dangerous to hope for a win? And what part can hope play in this kind of sport? Before the game, knowing their chances are slim, Ted gets reinvigorated by something Rebecca says about doing things differently and playing to his advantage of not knowing much about football. And the team come up with lots of trick plays which motivate them towards the big match, doing things differently. We're also still seeing Jamie Tartt occasionally, and there's a scene where we see how hurt he is about Ted letting him go, even though Ted didn't, Rebecca did. And we see him visit Keeley, his ex, where he bumps into his nemesis Roy in a hilarious interaction with Keeley in the middle. We also see Jamie take a stab at Roy about being on the bench for the match. first time we've seen him mocked for this. And Roy seemingly swallows it, making a joke of it afterwards. A sign that maybe he's starting to accept the transition that's coming his way, though you never fully know with Roy Kent. This also confirms that he's starting the match on the bench and has decided to not claim he's injured, which feels truer to his character really. Roy Kent doesn't really shy away from stuff that easily. So it's the day of the big match. Win and Richmond stay up, lose and they go down. It's all about avoiding the loss, just like life in general. And once again, the commentators remind us, it's the hope that kills you. But after these words, we flick to Rebecca and Keely getting ready to watch the game in the stadium, and we find them admitting they don't really love football that much, but today they really want the team to do well, and we can see that they have hope. And as Keely looks down at Roy warming up on the pitch, she says, "Today, I care very much." And at this point, even those of us that don't really like this sport find ourselves desperate for them to win. Then we move from the noise and the excitement of the stadium and the fans to the locker room, where we see Roy sit next to another player, Isaac. And he just hands him his captain band with the words, "Never stop breaking TVs." And then he taps him on the leg. A classy, minimalistic move that tells us who Roy's chosen for captain and why. He wants someone with fire, passion and drive, and he wants them to stay that way. Then Ted calls them all together for the pep talk. And here's some of it. "So I've been hearing this phrase y'all got over here that I ain't too crazy about. It's the hope that kills you. I disagree. I think it's the lack of hope that comes and gets you. See, I believe in hope. I believe in belief. Now where I'm from, we got a saying too, yeah? A question actually. Do you believe in miracles? Now I don't need y'all to answer that question for me, but I do want you to answer that question for yourselves right now. Do you believe in miracles? And if you do, then I want y'all to circle up with me right now. Come on, let's go." As they all put their arms in together, Ted looks to the captain, Roy, but Roy nods towards Isaac as the new captain, for Isaac to start the chant of 3, 2, 1, Richmond! But he starts the countdown from 12 and misses out 8, but you can't have everything in a captain. Halfway through the episode, we're out on the pitch for a big match, and Jamie's blowing a kiss from the pitch to Roy, who's on the bench. Meanwhile, Ted's shouting encouragement to Jamie, and Jamie thinks he's just trying to mess with his head. Ted is still learning the offside rule, and they execute one of their trick plays, which nearly leads to a Richmond goal just before half-time, but it doesn't, and the first half finishes 0-0. During half-time, the coaches are chatting tactics, and then Ted suddenly says, "Never mind, I'm going with my gut." Then he gets wound up when a player wants to check the Crystal Palace score, reiterating to the team they are playing for a win, not a draw. Then he says, "Roy, you're starting the second half," and Isaac passes the captain's armband back to Roy. On the pitch, the commentators are surprised by Roy Kent's reappearance because he's very slow, and around 61 minutes, Man City score and Richmond are down 1-0. Then, Jamie is running for a goal for Man City and Roy appears, chasing him down. He goes in with a tackle that brings both of them to the floor and the crowd goes wild. But Roy doesn't get up again, and among the cheers, we see Keely's face freeze as she realises he's not getting up. Roy is rolling around and tells his teammates who have run over to see him that he's bust his knee, with a few F-words thrown in. And then comes 5 minutes of TV that I cannot watch without a tear blurring my vision. As Sam, one of his teammates, goes to help Roy to his feet, Sam stops and just holds him down, which is a lovely throwback to a similar move that Roy did for him in another episode. And as he stays there for just a moment, Sam says to Roy, "Listen." And we hear the crowd chanting, "He's here, he's there, he's everywhere, Roy Kent, Roy Kent." Over and over it gets louder and louder. "He's here, he's there." And the camera moves towards Ted listening with awe, and then Jamie Tart looking confused by the reaction, and the fans in the stadium chanting and clapping and jumping up and down, and the fans who can only watch from the pub are chanting and clapping and jumping up and down, and the commentators say, "Well, we apologise for the fruity language," as the crowd serenades Roy Kent with a song that's echoed through the Premier League for more than a decade. Then Roy is helped to his feet, and he passes the captain's armband to Isaac, and he hobbles off the pitch as the commentators continue. Roy Kent will never leave on a stretcher. As Kent comes off, he claps the fans in gratitude. And as they cheer, Roy nods to Ted in a way that tells us all he won't be coming back, and Ted nods back in a way that just says, "Well done." We watch Roy make his way down the tunnel alone, and the commentators say, "Kent has been a fan favourite because he always left everything he had out on the pitch, and he did so tonight." Roy makes his way into the locker room, and you can hear the crowd's chants still going, but it gets quieter as he walks further away. until he slams the locker room door and the chanting is shut out. The commentary continues. Does this feel almost like a farewell to you? Well, you have to wonder at his age with that injury. Personally, I'm sorry to say, I think this might be the last time we ever see the great Roy Kent lace up his boots. My heart broke in this moment. Not because of a footballer and the end of a career so much, but because I know the feeling of loss. At the end of dreams, decisions out of your hands, taking your life in a way that you really despise in that moment. And as he stands in front of his locker and removes his shirt, and you know it's for the last time, it feels packed with symbolism, loss, grief, and endings. His career and something he loves is coming off and landing in a heap like his shirt, shut out behind him like the chanting, leaving him with only a bust knee and a lonely locker room. The fact that it's a triumphant ending of a great career doesn't really matter in this moment. It's just the loss being felt of something that was loved and lived for so long. And I think to different degrees we all know that feeling. And it's important that we allow space for that feeling before looking at all the amazing things that might have come before or through it. But what I love about how this is handled is that he sits on the bench in just his shorts, leans forward, head in hand, his bust knee out straight in front of him. It would be such an easy shot to leave there. But they take it one glorious step further, which is exactly what I always want to do with the podcast and loss. Don't leave things in the pain of loss. Go beyond that and show the hope and the comfort that can be found through it. Whether you want it or not, just show how often it appears and that we have a choice to accept it or push it away. Because hope is very hard to drown, and that's why they say, hope floats. And this is exactly played out in the next scene, because Keeley appears at the door. And the first time I saw this episode, and Roy was sat alone on the bench holding his head, I was just shouting out, "Run down, Keeley, run down!" No one should be alone at this point in loss, no matter how much they think they might want to be. And as she slowly opens the door, he looks up and says in true Roy Kent style, "You're not allowed back here during the game." She silently continues towards him. "I told you, you have to get out." And you can see what he's really saying is, "I don't want you to see me like this," as a mix of panic, hurt and anger rush across his face and voice. But Keeley keeps moving forwards, holding her coat, and we get a great back shot of her with Kent on the back of her football shirt. "I mean it! Stay the away from me!" She pauses briefly and looks at him, then moves forward and sits next to him, gently takes his hand, finding her way with how he's reacting, and then puts her arm around him, and again we get a lovely back shot of them, him shirtless, stripped bare, and her in her supporting Kent football shirt, as she takes his head onto her shoulder and lets him let go. Oh man, perfect. Such a great scene, and such a great example of coming alongside someone in grief. No words, just a gentle sounding out of what they need, knowing the person well enough to see that need and maybe even ignore their words, knowing it's not really what they meant anyway. I just love it. Meanwhile, outside in the stadium, there's a noise that Nathan says is 26,000 people checking their mobiles, and it turns out that Crystal Palace won 6-0, which means all Richmond need is a tie to stay up, with 3 minutes of extra time. Suddenly, Ted has a renewed hope in ties over wins, and the team, off their own backs, decide to undertake a Lasso special trick play that completely confuses the opposition and all the fans and commentators. This gives Richmond a chance, and Rojas, a football player whose motto is "Football is life," gets through and scores a goal, and everyone goes wild. They are now in a draw, which would keep them in the Premier League. However, play resumes as they're still celebrating, and Jamie Tartt breaks free for Man City, makes an extra pass, something he's not known for, and Ted was trying to get him to do at Richmond, but he wouldn't, and they score, ending Richmond's hope of staying up. And we get that heartbreaking, all too familiar scene in football where the players on the losing team sink to their knees holding their heads, and a haunting version of You'll Never Walk Alone plays as we see the devastation spread through the fans in the stadium and in the pub. The song continues to play as Ted is interviewed on the TV congratulating the opposition, and as he walks past a room with a glass window where he sees Jamie Tartt sitting on a bench hanging his head. Ted goes to enter the room but quickly stops when something is thrown towards Jamie, hitting the wall, and we see Jamie getting shouted at by his dad, not a nice man who scrounges off Jamie's football success. As he yells at him for passing the ball and not taking the glory himself, Jamie glances at Ted through the window and they exchange a look. It's a sad moment, and we realise the reason Jamie has so much confidence in himself is maybe because no one else has, and teamwork certainly wouldn't come easy to him having it never been clearly modelled. And we also know this moment gives Ted an insight into Jamie that he's going to use in some way, giving us a burst of hope that Jamie's episode won't end on this sad note. Then we see all the Richmond players and the other characters sadly sitting in the locker room as Ted enters. And he says this: "Hey, you all played a heck of a game out there. We may not have won, but you all definitely succeeded. I mean, you gave the champs 90 minutes of hell. Zorro, where you at? That dude had more saves than a Baptist preacher. Give it up for Zorro. Yeah, that's right. What about Roy? Roy chased down his grandson, stopped him from getting an easy one. Now look, this is a sad moment right here, for all of us. And there ain't nothing I can say, standing in front of you right now, that can take that away. But please do me this favour, will you? Lift your heads up and look around this locker room. Yeah, look at everyone else in here. And I want you to be grateful that you're going through this sad moment with all these other folks. Because I promise you, there is something worse out there than being sad. And that is being alone and being sad. Ain't nobody in this room alone." And at this moment, I don't know how your thoughts don't go to poor Jamie down the hall and the bigger losses that there are in life than sport, like family and relationships. Later, we see Jamie getting back on the bus with his team, and Coach Beard hands him an envelope, which Jamie jokes might be a love letter. But he opens it and reads it on the bus, and it says, "Way to make that extra pass, Ted," with a little plastic army figure with it. Side note, Ted received a package from his son with things to remind him of home earlier on, and it had a battalion of plastic army men to keep him safe, which he proceeds to gift other characters throughout the show. And I suspect that because each one's standing in a different position, Ted probably chooses them very carefully as to which one he gives to who, but I won't go into that here. Anyway, the one he gives Jamie is looking through binoculars, maybe a nod to him that Ted is watching out for him. And the note praises him for the exact thing his father was berating him for. And this is why I love this programme, because it never leaves someone out in the rain. It redeems. All this time, You'll Never Walk Alone has been playing in the background, and as it fades, we see Ted chatting to Rebecca. Assuming he's about to be fired, he asks if he can quit to save her the decision. But Rebecca has no intention of losing him and tells him that they have work to do next season, which we're all very relieved about for season 2. And then Ted spits water all over Rebecca's face because he didn't realise it was fizzy. And here endeth season 1 of Ted Lasso. And I could probably do a whole podcast on each episode if I had the time and space, because I still maintain it's hard to find a single film, TV programme or book that doesn't have loss in it, or even at the core of it. In storytelling, they often say add conflict. You always need conflict. But actually, mostly, you add loss. So much of what keeps stories interesting, compelling and ticking over, and so much of character development is based around loss. It's fascinating. As far as season 2 goes, it's still good, but it's probably an 8 for me, whereas season 1 was more of a solid 9. And I don't go that high easily for any TV. However, there's still many great scenes. And there's one scene that I loved that nearly made the cut for this episode, so I'll give you a quick overview because I just couldn't leave it out completely. Season 2, episode 8 is called Man City, and it brings back the Jamie and his dad relationship. Richmond are playing away to Man City this time. Roy Kent has joined the coaching team after a lot of coaxing and a stint of commentating. And after a tough game where they lose again, all the players and coaches are in the changing rooms when a security guard asks if Jamie's dad can come through. Jamie got him tickets, but then he supported Man City for the whole game. Then, in front of all the other players in a silent dressing room, his dad proceeds to mock and jeer them, bigging up Man City. Then he turns to Jamie and starts ribbing him, but also asking for him and his friends to get a pass onto the pitch to take photos. Jamie says he'd rather not organise that. Then his dad gets nasty and Jamie asks him not to speak to him like that, but his dad continues, belittling the whole team around him. Jamie turns away from him, a brave move to try and end the situation, but his dad grabs him by the arm and tells him not to turn his back on him, with a nasty word. And Jamie turns around and punches him in the face. A great moment of comeuppance, and was deserved, as far as physical violence goes. At which point, Coach Beard steps in and grabs his dad before he can hit back, and sees him out of the door, saying, "Watch the door, oops," as he bashes him into it. Then, in a heartbreaking scene that made me feel so helpless, Jamie is left just standing where he is in a silent locker room as all the players watch him in silence, a broken man. It's a cruel moment as the one who usually has all the confidence is just stripped of it. And they make us wait in this tension. But it's finally ended, very unexpectedly, by, no, not Ted, but Roy Kent walking up to Jamie confidently, without hesitation, wrapping his arms around him in a tight, purposeful hug. Gulp. As Jamie lets go into the hug and sobs, the other players watch in shock, and Roy, looking a bit confused by what he just did, just holds him. Meanwhile, Ted immediately walks out, very unlike him, and calls the psychologist they have on the team in tears. He's had on-off chats with her about his panic attacks that he started having, and this is the first time he fully opens up and he tells her that his dad killed himself when he was 16. And it's the first we've heard of it. He says, "I don't know if that's maybe where some of my issues stem from." To which she replies, "No, it definitely is." Then Coach Beard goes off on his own to process the loss of the match and all that's happened. And suddenly there's loss everywhere. Ted's dad, loss of control, loss of leadership like Ted usually leads with. Roy choosing to lose his hatred of Jamie. Jamie loses his face in front of his teammates. The team lost the match. Jamie's dad probably just lost his son. It's all over these scenes. But also the beauty that comes through loss and how one person's loss being worked through can impact those around them to seek solutions for their own grief. Roy's actions to Jamie started Ted's actions about talking about the loss of his dad. Bonding, friendship, honesty, deserved responses, support, coping strategies, shifting, all these things coming through the loss. The amazing complexities of relationships. It's just another great scene. Overall, there's loads to love about this comedy. I love the Diamond Dogs. I love the curse-breaking stuff in the episode 2 Aces. I love Carol of the Bells, the Christmas episode, which is so funny, watching Roy Kent roam around trying to find a dentist. And if you love a rom-com reference, Season 2, Episode 5, called Rainbow, is littered with them after Ted states early on that he believes in communism. Rom-communism, that is. He says believing in rom-communism is all about believing that everything's going to work out in the end. And I think I'm not even beginning to scrape the barrel when I say that there's references to When Harry Met Sally, Jerry Maguire, Sleepless in Seattle, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, You've Got Mail, Notting Hill, The Princess Bride, Love Actually, and even what feels like a bit of Cool Runnings going on. So I'm looking forward to Series 3 with equal amounts of nerves and excitement. I trust the writers and I hope the character development of these guys is true to who we know them to be now. I don't want Roy and Keely to split. I don't want Rebecca to turn back to her old ways. I don't want Ted to ever lose hope. I want Richmond to see success and I want Higgins to always be Higgins and Beard to always be Beard. But I also know that that's not how life goes. And it's the diversions, the reverting back to old habits and the failures that make the best stories of redemption and resurrection. For it to be a good season, there will have to be loss. There will have to be tears. But I'm also hoping for more bursts of the feel-good that it just seems to inject into you with each episode. And Nathan, well, it's all open for him. Season 2 ends with him being our main antagonist and who knows where that's going to go. But he does need to change. And I'm curious to see what and who they use to eventually do it. So thank you for joining me today and indulging me in this slight side project about loss. For more about The Silent Why and all things loss and hope, you know where to find me. Visit the show notes or thesilentwhy.com. I'm going to finish with just a few of the many wise words from Ted Lasso himself. To quote the great UCLA college basketball coach John Obi-Wan Gandalf, "It is our choices, gentlemen, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities."